of mankind. Not only was it the most destructive conflict in human history, but it was the ultimate clash of ideologies and factions which had slowly evolved for centuries. In our timeline, after years of war, the Third Reich was obliterated, Hitler committed suicide, and a violent ideology died with him.
So the start of this is kind of just saying how the U.S. won the war and how fascism kind of died. Like, after World War II, fascism died, and we're just kind of watching into that right now.
In the aftermath, the victors, the Allies, organized the entire world in a manner which would never allow such an occurrence to happen again. They were able to shape mankind's future in their image. Today we are globalized, connected both economically and socially. The internet, American influence, all can be tied back to the victors of that war.
It is all tied back, because that's why we have, we have diplomatic Germany today, we have democratic, and honestly, that is true. But honestly, want to see what would happen if Germany did win.
The reason I say this is because many don't think about the world today in any other way than the natural evolution of progress. Yet it is not. If the war's outcome had been any different, Western civilization from every aspect of life would have been radically changed. What if the Allies did not defeat Nazi Germany? What if in an alternate timeline, the Third Reich, through military might and conquest, conquered Europe and won World War II? I'm going to explore the effects of a Nazi victory on the human and global scale. How would it transform the 20th and 21st centuries? In American schools, Nazi imagery and teachings are only mentioned in brief generalizations.
That's one thing I do find that is crazy. A lot of schools today don't mention how Germany actually was. A lot of them just mention that they killed 6 million Jews, which is really bad, don't get me wrong. But a lot of them don't mention the other stuff too. A lot of them don't mention how Hitler came to power. A lot of them don't mention all the radicalism that there was and how bad he truly was. They just mentioned that one part where he killed 6 million people.
We all know Nazi policies were anti-Semitic, racist, authoritarian, etc.
Exactly.
But rarely is the ideology itself analyzed. In this
Exactly. Fascism needs to be analyzed, and so does Nazism. Nazism is a whole different thing. The thing is, though, Hitler wanted a whole Aryan race, and it's honestly crazy, because I don't really know how he would have been able to do it, but he wanted a whole Aryan race where everyone was united under one language, which was German. And that's honestly crazy how he would have done it.
This alternate scenario, I'm not going to specifically focus on what Germans could have done differently to have won the war. This has been debated by numerous historians. What I want to focus on is what such a world would look like if Hitler's plans were allowed to be put into action. Here is one scenario. In this alternate timeline, Nazi Germany has launched a successful invasion of Europe. Britain, France, Poland, the Eastern Soviet Union, and numerous other countries all have been occupied by German troops. Somehow Germany invaded Britain, and facing overwhelming odds, even though Churchill promised not to, the British are forced to surrender, or be basically annihilated. In this
A little bit of context here, just a little bit of context for y'all. This was called Operation Sea Lion that Hitler tried to do, but it failed. Or at least he either never did it. It's one of the two. I'm pretty sure they had it planned. That was Operation Sea Lion, where he was going to try to invade the UK with aircraft and everything he had. And there was also Operation Barbarossa, which y'all can see up in the Russian quarter, which is actually a real thing that he did in 1941, where he started it, and then he split his army off into 3 groups as soon as he got near Leningrad, Stalingrad, and Moscow, which was a huge mistake, because that split his whole army up, dividing up all his power.
alternate timeline, the Third Reich consolidates control over the new land it has occupied across the continent, making any effective American incursion impossible. At first, resistance movements would fight against the Germans and puppet fascists like in Vichy France and the UK, but after years of strengthening control over trade and resources, the Third Reich basically starves out any opposition. The Germans in our timeline, and in this alternate one, would massacre innocent civilians in retaliation for insurgency. With this tactic and low resources, resistance would fall pretty quickly. In the Soviet Union, the war between the Russians and Germans drags into a stalemate, eventually devolving into a resistance movement as the Russians are pushed back to the Urals. How this could have occurred, I'm not going to specify, but if the Nazis' plan succeeded, then the Soviet government is pushed further into Siberia, but the bulk of the population is now under German control. Nazism can...
So I'm going to be honest, if the world was under Nazism because of the Germans in 1940s, this would be a terrible world we're living in right now. It'd be honestly terrible. But the thing that's honestly the worst about it is that everyone would be under a one culture control, meaning we'd all have to change, and so would our families. And honestly, most of us wouldn't even be here right now.
Not be registered on how we traditionally think on the political scale. It is an entirely new beast, one that takes elements from across the spectrum to reinvent society into something entirely new. Hitler's new order was to be a civilization that threw away centuries of Western teachings, including the ideas of the French Revolution, the Enlightenment, and Christianity. A civilization that bases everything on the spread and domination of a specific group, the Aryan race. To understand a world...
No more context for y'all. The Aryan race is just Germans. That's literally all it is. It's just German people. Just German people. That's all it is.
Where the Germans won World War II, we need to understand the concepts of Nazism and their horrific ideas of racial superiority and classification. If Nazi Germany won the war, they would reorganize Europe based on racial hierarchies. Since eugenics was popular, the Nazis based their policies off of genetics and ranked people off of positive and supposed inferior genes. At the top was the Aryan race. Aryans to the Nazis were people of Germanic descent. This meant pure ethnic Germans had the highest status among the Nazi society. Just below true Aryans were Western Europeans, such as the British, Northern French, Irish, and Dutch. The Chinese and Japanese were also at this level, as Hitler declared them honorary Aryans. Below them were the Mediterranean race. Southern and Tanner Europeans such as Italians, Southern French, Spanish, and Greeks. Hitler believed Southern Europeans were naturally more lazy than the Northerners. This thought of Italian inferiority to Germans caused a lot of tension between Mussolini and Hitler. I'll talk about how this will play out later.
So the thing about that is, in World War II, Italy ultimately collapsed before, Hitler did. They were going to go into a civil war. Mussolini was deposed. It was a whole thing. And I don't know why, but Hitler was this evil man. He hated his own allies because of their race. He did honestly believe that, anyone who wasn't German wasn't the best. If you were German, you were, perfect, the blonde hair, blue eyes stereotype. But otherwise, he'd say, no, we gotta kill you, or you're just not perfect at all, and we don't really care about you.
Past a few levels, at the very bottom were the Untermensch. These were racial groups the Nazis considered too inferior or dangerous to live. These were the Slavs, such as the Poles, Russians, and Ukrainians, Jews, Roma, homosexuals, communists, etc. In this alternate timeline, if Germany was able to successfully implement Lebensraum, after decades of German control, Poland, Russia, and the Eastern Slavs would cease to exist. The Slavic people of Eastern Europe would face a genocide 10 times larger than that of the Holocaust in our timeline, mass extermination in the tens of millions. Hitler was a fan of how the United States successfully depopulated and pushed back the American Indians, and so he wanted to recreate this against the Slavs. In this alternate time,
this is one thing I didn't know. I didn't know he wanted to base off the Americans, but I will say Hitler originally had a train, and it was in Germany. It was his own personal train, and I'm pretty sure he named it the America or something like that. And as soon as America went to war with him, he had to rename it to the Berlin or the Brandenburg or the Germany, something like that. But he loved America so much because he wanted to stay neutral because of our ideals and stuff. But ultimately, that didn't happen because he declared war on us after the Japanese did.
Timeline following a German victory, borders are redrawn arbitrarily and governments are set up in what was formerly Poland, Ukraine, and the Russian states, now with German leaders. Slavs begin to lose rights, resistance is met with entire towns being slaughtered, and Jews are immediately sent into concentration camps, as they were to be automatically killed. The Slavic people were to become enslaved, and used as a mass labor force to contribute to the German war machine, and farm the land if need be. But first, most of the population would need to die. Laws are passed similar to Stalin's policies, causing mass starvation, and soon millions die in a massive famine. In our timeline, Hitler's plan was for over 50 million to die before colonization could begin. Over a period of a few years, once the natives no longer exist as a nation, German colonists began moving and colonizing former Slavic lands. Germany as a country is quadrupled in size, expanding from France to the center of Russia. The few Slavs deemed acceptable for Germanization are forced to only have children with Germans to eventually breed out the Slavic genes. The culture of these lands would be
This is one thing that's crazy. Hitler, he hated Jews, he hated Gypsies, he had Slavs, he hated all these because he said he was crazy enough to where he thought that Aryans were the only great race and they were the only ones who would work. For some reason, he felt like they were the best ones ever. And honestly, it kind of ruined a lot of stuff for him because there were so many cultures that were oppressed. And there was also little small rebellions, but eventually they would get like shot up and timed out, kind of. And I didn't know that he would do this to, get like the Slavs to become Germans. That's one thing that's interesting to me that he did.
Destroyed and torched. History of the people forgotten under Nazi genocide. With the massive industrial scale of the Third Reich and resistance defeated, they could easily be capable of such an atrocity. The German school systems would teach young Germans the inferiority of the Slavs, creating a new racial divide between German Aryans and enslaved Slavic people. Very similar to situations in apartheid South Africa, racial segregation and outright atrocities would occur between German colonial masters and enslaved Russians in the Ukraine colonies. Slavs would be banned from reproducing except to create new slaves. In fact, across Nazi Germany, abortion would not only be legal, but mandatory for non-Aryans. It would remain illegal for Aryan mothers, as German women would be expected to reproduce as much as possible. Mass sterilization would be enforced against parents who gave birth to unhealthy children, or kids born with Down syndrome or developmental illnesses. German colonists would farm the fertile lands of the Ukraine, and use the vast breadbasket to feed a growing German population. If successful, Nazi Germany would redefine the demographics of Europe, and in a few decades, most of the population in Eastern Europe would be of German descent. The New Order meant a complete reinvention of what it meant to be European, and a member of Western civilization. Nazi Germany would be the leading dominant nation of Europe, and be the puppet master to the countless fascist governments of the UK, France, Italy, and Spain. Even though propaganda would boast an equal union of European nations,
one thing I noticed, it just said France, the UK, and Spain. Italy's right there. They just didn't add Spain. If they said Italy, I didn't realize it, but it looks like they only forgot Spain.
In reality, some nations, even fascist ones, would be lower than others. Hitler's racial criteria would determine Nazi relationships, and so German policies would favor more Aryan nations like France and Britain over Mediterranean countries like Spain and Italy. In this alternate timeline, with the war over, the Nazis would immediately rebuild Britain, and fascist Britain would become the right-hand man to the Reich. As for the Italians, even in our timeline, Mussolini knew the disdain Hitler had for Southern Europeans, and it greatly affected the relationship between the two. Mussolini's call for a unity between the Nordic and Mediterranean races fell on deaf ears for the Nazis. In this alternate timeline, I predict Hitler simply would have tolerated Southern Europe for the sake of stability, while playing favorites with the Nordic French and British. This split would grow even larger in the following decades, becoming a culture clash between the two regions. In our timeline, the Holocaust was only supposed to be the first phase of the New Order, immediate genocide of undesirables within German borders. However, these were not the only groups the Nazis wished to silence. Nazism at its core was shaped by the idea of a race united under the full allegiance to the state and only the state. Citizens were to contribute militarily and technologically to advance the German race. To Hitler and the Third Reich, any idea that took focus away from the state was an enemy.
That's one thing that's crazy, even if it was religion, like Christianity or any other religion ever, that people have made, he'd take it away because it was a threat to the state. And also with the military thing, men were forced to sign up for the military. Every man, I think once they became 18, was forced to go to the military in Germany at that time, and probably would be still today.
Removing the Jewish question was the first phase of the New Order. The Slavs were next, and after that, Catholicism itself, or the church question. Hitler was born a Catholic, but grew to hate the church as he became an adult. His views fell perfectly in line with the Nazi ideology. Nazism viewed Catholicism as not only an obstacle, but a threat to the progress of the German state. They despised the idea of a non-governmental force having influence over Europeans and Aryans. Before the war, Nazis closed Catholic institutions, barred Catholic messages, and arrested many members of the clergy. However, in part with his alliance with Italy and to stop instability, Hitler made a treaty with the Vatican to respect Catholic institutions. Yet to the Nazis, Catholics remained a prominent threat. In this alternate timeline after the war, the Nazis would immediately break the agreement with the Vatican.
One thing I didn't realize is that Hitler hated Catholicism so much. I didn't realize that. I know Germany is more Protestant, but I didn't realize like that he hated that doctrine so much.
Germany and its occupied territories, Catholic institutions would be closed and its clergymen arrested. In Hitler's eyes, religion itself was fundamentally incompatible and dangerous to the progress of Europe. He even called those who were religious slaves. At the time, the Nazis had to put up a face of being Protestant Christians, but secretly, the highest ranks, like Joseph Goebbels, despised religion and Catholicism, yet they decided to postpone any action until after the war. They believed it was a foreign invention which promoted Jewry and made Europeans weak-minded and too merciful. Heinrich Himmler even wrote, "We live in an era of the ultimate conflict with Christianity. It is a part of the mission of the SS to give the German people in the next half-century the non-Christian ideological foundations on which to lead and shape their lives. This task does not consist solely in overcoming an ideological opponent, but must be accompanied at every step by a positive impetus. In this case, that means the reconstruction of the German heritage in the widest and most comprehensive sense." In this alternate time,
by the way, this Heinrich Himmler guy that he was talking about, this is like Hitler's right-hand man. I don't know if he said it or not, but this is like his right-hand man. This is like who he'd ask questions for and all that, and who do almost all of the stuff.
the Third Reich would have used everything to slowly strangle Christianity in its borders. Propaganda to paint Catholics at first as enemies of Aryans and Germans, and even secret violence against Catholic leaders, the same tactics which divided Europeans just as they did between Slavs and Germans. Over the decades, Catholicism would be stripped from Nazi Germany. Most of the Catholic Poles would have been killed in the hunger policies. In German Catholic regions, simple Nazi propaganda would be used to snuff out the church. Laws banning Catholic education and press would be enacted. After the Catholic Church, the Third Reich would actively discourage Christianity itself, and if decades of propaganda would work, they could create a generation of loyal, non-Christian Germans. Nazis would teach that the religion was a destructive, brainwashing Jewish force which weakened native Europeans. Some Nazis even wished to replace Christianity with neo-paganism, but in this timeline, religion would be replaced with loyalty to the Nazi regime and to the race.
That is correct. Germany back then and stuff, and even if it was still here now the same way, instead of having a religion, their only thing would be supporting the German race and the military. That'd be literally the only things we'd have right now. It'd be crazy to think about it that way, but it's true. I mean, just think for a minute. If you were just sitting at home now, look how much you already have. Now, think if you were in a military state of fascism and you just have to, instead of praise Jesus, or whoever you do, I hope y'all praise Jesus, because he is the king and he is the Messiah and he's the only way to heaven. I hope that y'all do, but just imagine instead of whatever religion you're praising now, that you're just praising Germans. You're just praising German fascists in the military. That'd honestly be a sad world to live in if that's literally the only thing we'd have.
Swastika would replace the cross across much of German Europe. This scenario is going to be a part of a new series. I don't know how many parts it will be, but I want to focus in detail on every aspect of life in this alternate scenario. I don't want to rush it. World War II was a defining moment that decided the history of Western civilization. In the Allied victory, Nazism was destroyed and never returned to power. But had the victory gone to Germany, the modern world would have evolved and taken a much darker turn. Over the next few videos, I'll explore in length one out of the infinite possible scenarios if Hitler had won the war. Like on Facebook and subscribe if you have not done so.
I want to thank y'all for watching this video. Thank y'all for watching the live that I was doing. It's been almost an hour, it's been over an hour of just gaming and stuff. And I'm gonna start creating this thing called Movie Monday, and I'm gonna keep doing that where I just release like every one of these every Monday. And I pray that y'all will turn to Jesus and start worshiping Him. And I hope y'all come to Jesus now, because there's no better time to come to Jesus, because you don't know if you got tomorrow or any other time. So don't push it off. Go to Him right now. Anyways, thank y'all for watching.